Alec, today we're going to discuss a film that had been on my radar. It's back from 2018, First Man, starring Ryan Gosling and directed by Damien Chazelle. I'll get into why I kind of picked this, but you've had a chance to rewatch this here really recently, I do believe. So I want your thoughts on this particular film.
So I'm going to start off by saying I got to use rewatch in quotes, because as I was rewatching this, I realized that I think I started this film and never finished it when it first came out.
Interesting.
And I don't know. I don't remember why. I remember going thinking I appreciated the movie, but didn't really like it, kind of a thing. But then as I'm rewatching this movie to talk about it, I realized about a quarter of the way through, I never got past this. This is all new. I don't remember any of this. And it could be I fell asleep or something else, or I may not fell asleep, but something else came on that I'm just not remembering. But it felt very fresh. This is my first time viewing. So right off the bat, outside of the opening sequence, which is fantastic, is very slow, very plotting. This movie is very much more of a character piece that just happens to be a man landing on the moon than it feels like it's a focus of the moon landing. For example, Apollo 13 is less about the people. It's more about the people in the situation.
Right.
Whereas this is much more focused on, it's a biography of more of Neil as opposed to the moon landing. It just happens to be his part of life getting to landing on the moon. That's the first thing I think. And that may be why some people didn't like it. Because I know a lot of people who were just kind of it was or meh, and walked away from it feeling kind of boring. I will say about both Laura and I kind of felt about not halfway through, but a third of the way in, it starts to pick up the pace. It starts to kind of move forward. And I think that's kind of the point where I dipped out maybe originally before that happened. And not so much the pace, just the interest as things kind of progress in his pursuit of, landing on the moon, the Gemini missions, and then the Apollo missions. It becomes a lot more interesting. Now, I will say both Laura and I 100% think that Gosling was snubbed at the Oscars.
Yeah, did he even get a nom for this?
Not even a nom.
Yeah, that's a problem.
And Rami Malek won it for Bohemian Rhapsody, which I think Rami Malek was great, but my goodness, Gosling put in the performance of his life, I think, in this. Just absolutely. I mean, maybe Blade Runner 2049, he was also stunning in this too, but this is, I just got to say, he did so much with just the limited dialogue that he had. He did so many scenes where he has no dialogue, where he's literally just emoting or lack of emoting in his face and facial features or his posture. And he just gets across all of this information to the viewer just from how he's handling himself. This is amazing. Me as an actor looking at this, I'm just absolutely impressed. Right. I mean, this is the guy who 10, 15 years before this movie was doing The Notebook, and he was always kind of that, the boyfriend or the romantic interest, and I'm so glad that he did something. I think you and I have talked about this, that he kind of stepped away from that and did a movie like Drive that was way outside the box, that allowed directors to realize, oh, he's not just the pretty face. That you can put him in a different, position as a different character and still have a great performance from him.
And Drive was kind of his Fight Club.
Yeah.
For the way Brad Pitt's career trajectory was, and he was stuck doing those.
Yeah. Legends of the Fall, Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah. And then he did Fight Club, and his career trajectory opened up. And I agree. So this was my favorite film from 2018. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a particularly great year for movies. I think your Best Picture winner, if I'm not mistaken, was Green Book or something like that. So, which I'm not decrying Green Book, but I'm just saying it was a thinner year for movie making. And this one was my favorite. Now, I had actually had the chance to watch this in digital IMAX.
Oh, that's nice.
And I have to say, so the film is kind of really grainy up until they're in the lunar lander. Mm-hmm. And then the resolution ups. And then when they open the hatch to that's when the aspect ratio expanded to full frame IMAX.
Oh my goodness. That's
astounding. Absolutely astounding. So everything on the moon then was full aspect ratio, and it was dynamite. And like, so the whole movie for the rest of the way until I think he returns and then it goes back to a traditional aspect ratio. So really, really well done. And then all of the Gemini issue where they go into that rotation that he has to, that was super intense in IMAX, mainly for the sound. But the movie opens with him testing, what is it? The X-15, I believe.
Yeah, X-15.
Rocket plane. That grabbed me immediately because of the sound design in IMAX was, so I have to say, like, it being my favorite had a lot to do with the presentation too, but I really enjoy and appreciate the film. And you're right, his performance is one of the best of his career, probably a top 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I think this and like Blade Runner, and then maybe Drive, because he kind of shows that more of that restraint, and Drive's just a really, really cool movie anyway. So
exactly.
But I have to give massive props to Chazelle because like he might be one of the most diverse directors working today to be able to make this and La La Land
and Whiplash.
It's like, man, is there a genre that this guy can't touch? I don't know. And he's not very old either. He's really, for a director, he's like really quite young. So this was a standout for me from the first time I saw it. Emotionally, he is a more restrained character, but the loss of his daughter is just devastating. Yes. And when I saw it, I mean, Laura was a year old. So like, I was just like, man, that when he cuts from like him, like she's losing her hair, and then it immediately does a hard cut to the coffin being lowered and the sound, just brutal. I mean, just brutal, like uncompromising, brutal direction. See, that's kind of you touched on it. You're absolutely right. The movie didn't do well because people thought that it was going to be a movie about landing on the moon, and it's just not. It's about the man. And so even the way that they shoot the moon landing didn't satisfy most audiences. They got really ticked off. And then of course there was this whole controversy surrounding, they didn't film him planting the American flag, and which then turned into, the movie's anti-American. And it's like, if you watch the film, that's just not true. There's plenty of other instances of the flag. When the Saturn V lifts off, it runs right past the American flag that's painted on the side of that. Like there's nothing anti-American about it. Like, it's just, I feel like that became a narrative for people that just didn't like the movie.
I think it did a great job of kind of showing Neil with his flaws and making him less of the hero, the icon, and more of the man, and everything that kind of brought him to that point in his drive, but also some of the things that drove him away but the issues he had with his family life because of the loss of his daughter, because of the loss of friends, and that kind of ambition that pushed him to kind of be somewhat semi-isolated. And I think, it really, watching this now, there's a lot that Damien is trying to get across. And I think Damien is really trying to focus on that is going to drive away the average viewer who this is not a fast-paced movie. This is not a spectacle. I am so jealous of you talking about this, seeing this in IMAX. I'm like, I need this to come back into theaters so I can see this in IMAX and watch it, because I'm sure that, it's not going to. It did poorly in the box office. It doesn't. It's not a amazing film that people can continue to talk about. I hadn't even really thought about it until you were like, hey, let's do First Man. And I was like, I gotta rewatch that. I remember it being but it'll be interesting to talk about. And again, I'm not saying this is my favorite movie ever, but both Laura and I walked away going, wow, that was a powerful movie. Why didn't this be nominated for win more awards? This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it was, I went ahead and double checked. I didn't want to make a mistake on it, but it was entirely shot with film. 16 millimeter. Most of the movies shot in 16 millimeter. It's really grainy. There's some 35, and then they did actually shoot full IMAX 70 mil just for the moon landing sequence. So it's a beautiful image, and I love the more naturalist color grade that it has. I'm not justifying my own enjoyment of the movie, but this does show up on published lists of Christopher Nolan's favorite films.
Mm-hmm.
This one for sure shows up. This reminds me tonally in a lot of ways. I feel like the content is similar, but it feels like a companion piece to me to The Right Stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The Right Stuff has got a very 80s flair to it. In fact, the Right Stuff's closer to a 70s movie with the way that it's kind of paced and super long and stuff. But I had those vibes when I watched it, and I love The Right Stuff. So like this was definitely in my wheelhouse. And I'll tell you, one of my favorite sequences is when he's with the other astronaut. I forget who he flies with, but they're up in the corridor at the top of the pad, getting ready to get bolted into Gemini.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing's just the structure swaying, and the lights are swaying. I was like, man, I don't remember a space film where the terror or like the danger was really conveyed. Of like, even in The Right Stuff, like you never feel like it just doesn't have the same sound design and like some of the techniques. It doesn't ever really feel quite as dangerous. And that sequence, even before things go awry, when he, like pre-launch, it feels like super terrifying. Everything's vibrating and the thing's noisy, and of course multiply that tenfold in IMAX.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, it's funny that they even made just still being on Earth, not even in the rocket ship, dangerous. And yeah,
which it was.
Yeah. Oh no, the whole process was, and I think, was that the one where, did he go up with Jason Clarke's character Ed, or was that with Elliot, his other friend, the other civilian? Because pretty much most of the astronauts were all like Navy or Air Force, but
it wasn't Jason Clarke. It was
then Patrick Fugit, the Elliot C or whatever, the other civilian.
It wasn't Clarke as Ed White.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And I'd forgotten that Clarke was in it. I remember more the back half with Corey Stoll as Buzz.
Yeah. Who, by the way, this movie does not put him in a good light at all.
No, he rubbed some people the wrong way.
Yeah. And Corey Stoll is perfect casting to play that kind of
he is
jerk. I was just like, to a T, I'm like,
but it's cool. Yeah. No, sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's fine.
I had a thought. I wonder how much of that was written into the narrative, because it creates some initial conflict between him and Neil, but then they bury the hatchet after the intensity of basically almost running out of gas to make the landing, and Neil's going manual. And so they're forced to work together, because you remember the training sessions with them building up to that. They're just at each other's throats. Like, this is not going to work. Like, Buzz wants to do it one way, and Neil's like, hey, if this starts to go wrong, like I'm just flipping the switches and going manual with this. I don't know how much of that was true, but it made the movie more interesting because it's conflict. And
yeah. Well, and you also get some good lines from Ryan when he's talking. He's just like, when Buzz just says, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. And then Neil just goes, maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And like just these nice little quip, one-liners. The dialogue, I got to say, is excellent. Like, there's, especially for having a main character who's probably speaks much less than the majority of some of the side characters.
Yeah.
It is, but yet to still kind of push that forward is immense. Like, this is a great talent of writing. And I never felt like the dialogue was super expository or superfluous. Like, this was certainly something that they were economical with the words that they were using, and you got across a whole lot of weight, both with the actual things that were being said and the stuff that was not being said.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of this, I mean, the whole relationship between Neil and Janet, a lot of it is done with very little dialogue. It's a lot of looks. It's a lot of gestures, and it's just powerful. I think what they have done. Like I definitely agree. Chazelle has done an amazing job with this film of just kind of getting everything across.
There are times where it feels, because of the minimal dialogue or maybe the more naturalist dialogue, it feels almost like a Malick. It feels like a Malick film sometimes.
That was one of my comments that I was going to say. I was like, hey, you know what? If you added in just a couple extra shots of trees, like this would be a Terrence Malick film. You know,
Terrence Malick goes to space. Yeah, it does have some of that.
And I think maybe that's what threw me off in the beginning, because the beginning is very heavy of that. There's a lot of just shots where not much is happening, and it does feel like kind of that normal Malick of, here's a babbling brook that we're going to watch for 30 seconds. Here's trees waving in the wind. And you and I do disagree on Malick in a lot of ways. I am not a fan, and I know you generally like most of his stuff. I think the only one I like really of his is Thin Red Line. But most of the others I'm not a fan of.
Right.
Generally.
Right.
But
yeah.
But I digress. So
I know, and kudos to Claire Foy. I didn't particularly like her character for a lot of the movie, and I think that was intentional. But she is kind of the voice of reason for a lot of this, because of his refusal to like really ever want to acknowledge how dangerous any of this is. I mean, she's just like she's incredulous, like with how nonchalant he is with his sons. And just kind of, well, you know,
and like, just still dealing with grief years later about his daughter, and won't talk to anyone. Yeah. And then the one guy he does talk to ends up, unfortunately, you know, dying in Apollo 1, you know? Yep. So,
well, by the way, that scene,
like my goodness,
Gosling's performance there, when he breaks the wine glass in his hand, was a really nice piece of direction. And then he immediately has to pivot because he gets the call from Deke Slayton, played very well by Kyle Chandler. I thought Chandler did a great job of playing Deke. It's a heavier character piece that just happens to be surrounded to the backdrop of Apollo 11. So, but they definitely, I got Right Stuff vibes with the number of guys that die either in training accidents in the NASA jets or actually in the Apollo 1 fire. Yeah.
And I can't remember the line, but yeah, it's something along the lines of, he's talking to Bob Gilruth or whatever. They're chatting like whether or not he should like he'd just flown the moon lander training vehicle or whatever and crashed it. And then they're like, you know, what's at what cost? And he's basically saying, we've already paid a cost. Like we're already here. I wish I could remember the line, but it's some great where he just kind of tells off Bob of like, we've already paid this cost. We need to keep moving forward.
Right.
And again, it's stuff like that where it's not a very long sentence that Ryan says, but it's so powerful. Like I literally kind of stopped for a moment. I just went, wow. And looked at Laura. I was like, that was a fantastic line. And I wish I can remember it now, but I'll have to find it. The other thing is the cast I think is absolutely stunning. You know, you talk about Kyle Chandler and Deke. I think Jason Clarke I really enjoy. I've liked him in everything that he's done.
Me too.
I do actually like Pablo Schreiber, who plays James Lovell. I really enjoy him too. It's like, basically, this movie's kind of filled with guys that I wish Hollywood would give a chance to kind of star in their own series or film. Now Pablo is he was starring in the Halo series, but that's been canceled.
That was canceled, unfortunately. Yeah. No, you're right, because then you have Shea Wiggum as Gus, who I thought was amazing casting to play Gus Grissom. Like he's perfect for that character. And I hadn't really seen him in much stuff. And he pops up in a movie now and again, but the first thing I ever watched him in was Boardwalk Empire,
which he was fantastic in as well. Yeah.
You get Lucas Haas back from the dead as Michael Collins. Like, you can tell that Chazelle is, in my opinion, not unlike Quentin Tarantino in his sensibilities of plucking actors back out of that maybe once were fairly popular or mid-career and back out of obscurity because he knows they're right for the role.
Yeah.
And I've always appreciated that approach. Obviously, Gosling's the lead, and the studio is going to want that. But past the first couple of people, that's where I think Chazelle and his casting director are really calling the shots and saying, no, these are the folks that I want.
Yeah. And I've always been a big fan of Ethan Embry as well. So I was happy to see him get a little bit of screen time in this. But I've also been a huge fan of Kyle Chandler ever since Early Edition. That was a fantastic show. But the acting in this was superb. There wasn't really anyone who I felt phoned it in or was a bad choice. I agree. I wasn't a fan. I didn't really like Claire Joy's character as Janet. But I don't think you're supposed to. She is the voice of reason, but she's also a protective mother and a protective wife, and trying to reason with a guy who's not willing to see the danger that he's in.
There was something else to it where they almost made her, I don't know what it was. They made her more unattractive than she really is. Mm-hmm. Maybe they needed that, and they didn't want her to look too good looking for the era or the film and be a distraction. But Claire Foy's better looking generally than the way they did her makeup and hair and stuff to play Janet Armstrong. And I think a lot of that was the fact that it's the 60s and I love the look of the movie. The color timing is superb. I love that most of it's Super 16. They even shot stuff that looks like Super 8 with his home movie material that they later do flashbacks to when he's on. And that scene on the moon, man, is at the crater is extremely powerful.
It's the culmination of the entire movie. It's that's the moment. That's the apex.
Yeah.
And I love it. It was so well done. And I love the fact that Chazelle decided to actually film things in space correctly, where it was no sound whatsoever. And we're getting a lot more of that now, but doesn't feel like that's the smart choice, because you may alienate some viewers because it's so quiet and silent and you don't hear anything. But obviously that's more realistic. And for someone who really likes space and that kind of stuff, it's nice to always kind of see that being added and not trying to Hollywood it up.
Yeah. The other component that we haven't really touched on with this film is that I think the score is really underrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're using some non-traditional instrumentation for a lot of it until you get to when they're bringing the eagle down. There's a score that comes in that's much more traditional, orchestral. But there's stuff before that. I don't know what they're using. I'm not familiar with what the instrument is, but
it's the theremin. It's the one.
Oh, it is the theremin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because Neil was actually actually played the theremin.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if he played it. I think he had one, but he also really liked it. So the tape that Neil brings to space and gives to Buzz, that has the theremin on it as well.
Interesting.
And so that's why they play that a lot.
It was scored by this Justin Hurwitz, and he's super young, was born in 85.
Yeah.
So
was Chazelle, by the way.
So this film was these guys, I'm sort of jealous because they're just barely in their 30s, just producing what I consider really high level stuff. Mm-hmm.
Well, and Justin did both La La Land and Whiplash with Chazelle, so I think they're kind of a duo.
He's a 2-time Oscar winner, by the way.
Oh yeah, because he does fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
Say what you will about the movie La La Land, the music is absolutely amazing.
I don't know. I hate musicals, and I totally like that movie.
Yeah.
So,
it was good.
I think our time in La La Land kind of painted my perspective on liking that movie. I mean, I didn't have any sort of failed romance in the city of Los Angeles, but
I was triggered with a little PTSD when they just showed Emma Stone getting rejected from all those auditions. I was I've been there, where someone walks in and takes a lunch order while you're auditioning. That didn't actually happen, but stuff similar of
yes,
notes being passed and being oh yeah, I'll call him back, and I'm acting up here trying to get this job. And it's like, okay, thanks everybody.
That reminds me of that anecdote that Matt Damon tells about how him and Ben Affleck auditioned for Dead Poets Society and got near the final, like were really close to final casting and lost out to Ethan Hawke and somebody else. That summer they're working at the local movie theater, handing out tickets, ripping people's tickets to get into Dead Poets Society. And Damon cited as like that. Those are the margins of how brutal Hollywood is. We were super close to being cast in that and didn't get it. And so we're working at the theater, ripping people's tickets. Like that's especially for an actor, that's the margins you're playing with. Now he follows it up with, hey, they told us you're on the right track, keep auditioning. And obviously the rest is history, but it's true. Like it's a brutal industry.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have my own stories of like interviews where I was really close to stuff and didn't get it. And which was just soul crushing, especially when you're broke and you're like, oh.
So there was a really funny moment when Laura and I were watching this. It was on The Descent and the alarm kept popping up in the thing. And it was like 12:02, 12:01. They're like, oh, it's okay. You know, you can go for the alarm or whatever. They kept pushing it off. And Laura's like, it's just like, it's like they're turning on and off again or something like that. Like, it's just something like it's running out of memory. And so I did a quick lookup of what those were. Basically, it was like, that's exactly what it was. It was that like there was too much information coming in. So it was overloading the memory. So they basically had to like reset the memory and it was just like start over. And it was just like, she was like, I can't believe we laughed about it pretty hard because I was like, you were so close to exactly what was going on. Oh my goodness. And to think they did all of that with technology that was way less than what's just in my cell phone, you know?
Yeah.
By a large margin.
Yeah, and they're having to recreate all of it because they trashed a bunch of
Yeah. You talked about the scenes of them landing were definitely not what a typical moviegoer would like, but I think it made it a little bit more intense of just staying inside the vehicle because you don't have you're just looking through that little window.
The whole movie shot Gosling. Like that.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's Christopher Nolan commented on that very thing. He was like, he was almost praising his boldness of choice to stay with Neil.
Yeah.
Like you only have his perspective for most of the movie. Like there's a couple times where you'll get outside of when they're trying to dock with the Aegina or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so you do get a sense of it spinning, but a lot of it, you're stuck in there with them. I think that frustrated some audiences. I really do. I like it. It's definitive. You're
choice.
Clearly wanting me to stay with the perspective of your central character when you restrict my view. But then once they were on the moon, then it was a much more freeing.
Mm-hmm. It was stunning how they did that. I mean, just on my 65-inch TV, it still looked great. I can't imagine what it would look like in IMAX setting.
It was just digital IMAX, but I think they had upgraded the projectors by then and stuff. So yeah, that wasn't even with laser. With laser, it even went taller, wider.
Bad.
Nothing like a good IMAX presentation.
Yeah.
But yeah, the crater scene with the bracelet, flashbacks, the music, you're right. It's that culminating moment and gave me all the feels. And
which is funny to say the culminating moment is not when they actually land or say the line, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. No. Like, again, this just shows that this is not a movie about the moon landing. This is a movie about Neil Armstrong.
There were questions. Did Neil really drop a bracelet in there? Probably not, but he really did take a moment at that crater by himself. That is confirmed by Buzz. So he definitely had a moment of reflection in some capacity. Mm-hmm. Whether he actually took anything up there. Now I think he had a sister that she swore up and down she felt like he did take something of hers up there to leave on the moon. But you're talking about, it's just the irony of one of the most famous, explorers, men of science, of the 20th century, and he's exceedingly private right up until when he passed away.
Yeah. I mean, there's still people don't know what's in his PPK. Like there are certain things that we do know about, but there's a lot that still are very, very private, and he wouldn't tell anybody about. He was a complicated man, and I think Gosling did a fantastic job of pushing that along. And I think it's a performance of his career, definitely easily in the top 3 of mine for what he's done. And I think he's a phenomenal actor. I really like him. Could do a lot of different stuff, but this was just astounding to me of just seeing him do this. I love space movies. I do. I
do too, especially when they're done at this level.
Yeah.
And there's not like there's a ton of them, but
I mean, am I gonna throw this on, again and again? Absolutely not. This is just too emotionally draining.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, going back, the opening sequence does such a phenomenal job of showing his calm under pressure, because there's just the moment where it's like, hey, you're about to bounce off the atmosphere, or you bounced off the atmosphere. You're ballooning, you're going up, not down. Almost like Houston's almost like goodbye, or not Houston. I think it was Edwards Air Force Base.
It was Edwards. Yeah, I believe so.
Going almost goodbye. And then he was able to kind of obviously pull it out. But like that kind of is just, okay, that's where we're going to be. This is how this movie is going to go. And it's such a great scene. Just such a great intro. It gave me a lot kind of Interstellar vibes of the opening sequence of the kind of the crash. But my goodness.
Where Coop actually dies.
Yeah.
And the rest of the movie's a fever dream.
Well, it's either that or he transcends into being the 4th dimensional being or 5th dimensional being. I forget what it is already. And so it's just,
I read that theory recently. It was pretty funny. No, this is a good one, man. I'm glad you gave it another look and appreciated it for what it was. And
it definitely made me like, I'm excited now to see what Chazelle does next, really.
Yeah, and I've not seen Babylon yet.
Again, we started it and then stopped it a little bit.
Yeah, I think I'll give it its due at some point, just because I do appreciate his talents, and if he missed the mark a little bit on that one, so be it.
He's got 3 amazing ones.
He does, and I'm excited to see what he does next. I think he's taking a break a little bit right now and just doing some screenwriting. I don't see anything upcoming with him in the director's chair, but that's not going to stay that way for long.
No, not at all. No. So
you got any closing thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I would just say, if you're going to watch this, know that it's a film about Neil and get through the first third. Like, it does sometimes feel slow, but there's a purpose behind it of getting you to kind of know the character.
I feel like it rewards a patient viewer.
Yeah.
I feel like you're not expected to slog through, 2 hours plus before, I guess 2 hours 21. So it's not a particularly long movie from a running time standpoint, but yeah, it does take its time in a lot of ways, but I think it does pick up, like you said, and the viewer is rewarded for giving it its.
And I will say, it has been stated that the Armstrong kids have said this is the most accurate portrayal of their parents. So they're behind it. So actually, even one of his sons is even in the movie, or a cousin is in the movie or something like that too. I forget. I remember reading that somewhere.
I did see an interview with the sons where they were talking about their dad, and they did give props to the way he was portrayed, just his sense of being, I guess. Well, we appreciate everybody listening this week as we kind of unpacked a film that kind of flew under the radar for 2018. It did win 1 Oscar, but
it was like visual effects, I think.
Yeah, something like that. One of the technical categories. But, the big reason Alec and I do this is, we obviously just love talking about movies with each other. But since it's a podcast and it's out there for consumption, I kind of like bringing the microscope back on a movie that we maybe felt was kind of undervalued at the time. And so in our small little corner of the world, I think we've attempted to do that with this one. And hopefully some people that maybe kind of wrote it off decide to give it a shot, because I think if you know what you're getting going in, you're more likely to kind of appreciate what Chazelle's trying
Absolutely.
to do here. So, all right, man, we're gonna sign off until next Monday.
Thanks, everybody.